What's good, everybody? Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the Two Preachers in a Popcorn Box podcast. My name is Brian, your host. In this podcast, you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, Audible, Amazon, um, pretty much everywhere, right? If you're watching this right now, you're watching us on Facebook Live as well as YouTube Live as well. So you may be wondering, Brian, this is two preachers in the popcorn box, and I only see one. Well, my co-host DT is under the weather today, and so we are praying for him, making sure that he feels better, and he'll be with us next week to give us his flavor, his flow on movies and everything ministry. I'm gonna try to hold it down as best as I can. Y'all know Derek is a beast. So yeah, 80s movies, man. The Goonies is the one that we are focusing on today. This movie is one of my favorite movies from the 80s. It was a movie that really was a string of really great, fun, high atmosphere, high adventure type movies that kind of made me fall in love with the movie process. The 80s were, according to people in our generation, like the golden era of movies. And my personal favorite genre were the adventure movies, right? Like Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, right? Those trilogies, as well as the Goonies. Um, Now, one of the things that I loved most about the Goonies was the fact that these movies were innocent and without complication, right? Um, Most of these movies had, of course, great themes, great plots and storylines, but it wasn't serious. Like it wasn't like these daunting, heavy, complicated movies. There was just a joy, and I feel a lot of positive thoughts about a lot of the movies from the 80s. And I think that's something that's kind of missing from some of the movies that we that are put out today. There aren't really movies that are as fun or that capture a carefree type of an attitude that the movies of the 80s did. And I mean, it could be the fact that, maybe I'm getting a little older and I'm becoming like a lot of the people do. Like we said, that our parents, the movies that they watched, there's no way that those movies were so great because we were only focused on the movies of today. And so that particular period, you know, looking back on it, man, those movies were so classic. And that's one of the reasons why I think the movies are so popular. That they were fun. They were the characters were so memorable, and we'll talk about the characters from this movie as well. Um, but it was just good times, man. Good times. So today, again, we're going to talk about the Goonies. It is based in the state of Oregon, and you have a group of kids who find themselves on a adventure treasure hunt type of a situation that really is birthed out of a financial type of a situation. One of the main characters, Mikey, his father, is about to lose his house, right? And so Mikey is he's a kid, so he's very depressed. He's down about the fact that he has to potentially leave his family and leave his friends. And whenever you're 8, 9, 10, 11, your close friends are everything to you, right? And so as you meet each character, you realize that these guys have very various and weird personalities, but they all mesh together to form a gang of sorts that comes together to basically achieve their end and achieve their goal. So one thing that I kind of mentioned it earlier, that it's important that we have moments of joy. All right. Um, when I watched this movie, one of the first things that I realized was that, man, this was a feel good movie, and I needed a feel good movie. I needed a break away from the craziness of 2020, from the stress even of this week. This podcast is recorded the week of November 7th, which is also the week of us electing a new president. And so we, of course, now, if you're listening to this, we it's official that President-elect Biden and Kamala Harris have now officially been announced as the future president and VP. But these last couple of days were a little stressful, right? Not knowing how things were going to work out. The election process was extended. Technically, it's normal, but it felt like it was extended a lot longer than it normally is. And so many times, whenever you're in stressful situations, whenever you're in situations that raise your level of awareness to the point to where your mind starts racing and all of that, it's often good to get away and to do something that makes you smile, to do something that takes your mind off of the seriousness of your situations. And so I found that this movie did that for me. And it was a breath, I'm sorry, it was a breath of fresh air. It was a great change of pace where everything that I saw, that I read, that I heard was negative. This particular movie was a joy from the very, very beginning. From the time that you meet each character, you have the panic of Mikey, and then you have the carefreeness of Chunk. Right? Chunk is the food loving, joke cracking friend of the group. And so he was so hilarious to me in this movie. I loved it. I loved his dry, quick humor. Right? It was amazing to me. And so yeah, in life, I hope this week at some point you found a way to do something that brought you joy. Whether it's video games, whether it's movies, whether it's reading, whatever it is, always make sure that you take a break and do something that brings you joy, that brings you excitement, something that can change your mood if you feel down and if you feel depressed. All right, that's important. So let's dive a little bit into the movie. So basically, again, the main plot of the movie is that Mikey is very, very down and depressed about the possibility of him having to move because his father is about to lose his house. And so the gang comes to Mikey's house, and you have Mikey, you have Mouth, you have Data, right? We mentioned Chunk, and then we also have the big brother of Brandon. And so as they are, basically just chilling around the house, Mouse says, "Hey, what's in the attic?" let's go check and see what's in the attic. And in the attic, they find a treasure map. Apparently, this city in Oregon has history of a lost treasure that a lot of people have tried to find, and they never were able to find it. And so they find this treasure. And what's interesting about Mikey's personality is that prior to finding this treasure map, he really is despondent and doesn't have a lot of hope, right? He doesn't have much outlook on life at all. Everything is negative, right? But once he finds this treasure map, his entire demeanor changes, right? He had something to be hopeful for. And whenever we lose hope, many times we all of our activities are filtered through that lens of hopelessness, right? We don't really try to change our situation because we don't think our situation is ever capable of change. And we also don't think that we are capable of changing it or that we can improve the situation in any way. So that is a turn in his character that I thought was really really interesting because his eyes grows right. He finds his imagination again, and that's something that we have to always do. We have to ensure that we are able to rekindle and refine our imagination. It is the imagination that allows us to have hope, to believe in things that are impossible, and to dream again, right? And so now Mikey gets all of the details or the details that are available at the moment of the treasure map. And he now is encouraging his friends. He says, hey, guys, we can do this. This treasure, I believe that is there. And he had friends who didn't believe the way he believed, right? His older brother was trying to shoot him down. Brandon was like, nah, man, people have been looking for this stuff for years and no one's ever found it. And so, what do you do when you have a vision, when you have a dream, and those closest to you shoot you down, right? What do you do? And what Mikey does is he persists to achieve this dream and to find this treasure. Now, his motivation is I'm not ready to leave, right? I have all of my family, my friends. I'm not trying to leave. And so that becomes his motivation. And so go, they find this restaurant that is a old restaurant, hasn't really been used in years. And this is where they find the primary villains of the movie, right? The Ferratelli family. All right, this family is a family of misfits, oddballs, and it's a classic 80s villain, right? You have a ringleader, which was the mother. You have the somewhat aloof leader, right? Which was the guy that was in jail. Go, Mikey. Right, exactly. And then you have a, a character who can always go one way or the other, right? One that isn't always invested in the villainy and could potentially turn and help the heroes. And this character is Sloth. Sloth is the disformed, not visually appealing, excuse me, um, baby brother of the older brother, and his name escapes me. But what's interesting about Sloth is that because of his physical features, there is a perception that he is dangerous, that he's scary, and that he is the worst possible person, right? And so there's this idea and this rumor that whenever you see somebody like that, obviously they are out to hurt you, right? And so Chunk and Sloth have this very interesting dynamic and very interesting friendship that they develop throughout the movie, right? When Chunk first meets Sloth, he is scared. He's yelling. He thinks that Sloth is going to hurt him, right? And one of the funniest parts of the movie is that he has a baby Ruth in his pocket, right? And so Chunk offers the baby Ruth to Sloth, and Sloth is like, "Baby Ruth," right? And so they eventually break the baby Ruth in half, and they share it. Sloth shares the baby Ruth with Chunk, and that automatically brings down whatever walls, whatever preconceptions that Chunk had about Sloth, regardless of what he looks like. In perception, oftentimes, or misrepresentations of people can often rob us of key friendships, right? Just because you have this idea of what an ideal friend should look like, or this idea of what a proper relationship should look like. If we have this tunnel vision of what we think our friends should look like, then we miss out on people who can help us achieve the ends and achieve the goals that we're setting forth in our life. It's amazing how their dynamic and their friendship is one of the key parts of the movie and key lessons of this particular movie, right? Um, okay, so friendships, they come in all shapes, all sizes. Um, I'm sure that Chunk and Sloth were the butt of all the jokes growing up. Of course, Chunk, his nickname or his name is Chunk, right? Mainly because he loves to eat. The entire movie, there wasn't one particular um, line that wasn't geared toward food. Everything he talked about was food, and so he was bullied because of his weight, right? And so many times we are those of us who have been bullied, we kind of sometimes feel isolated. But you have these two people who are isolated and they come together and they form a really interesting friendship and really interesting team. Um, so I talked about um, imagining or reimagining possibilities, right? Adventure movies are wonderful, especially the way they did them in the 80s, because you were always anticipating what was going to happen next. There was always this unknown element of their movies and this invitation to a new world that you had never seen before. And many times we limit ourselves and we limit our minds to our current environment. And this movie encourages me to increase my imagination, right? Go beyond what I've seen all of my life. Go beyond what's comfortable and reevaluate what's possible, right? With God, all things are possible, right? Many times we look at our lives and we view them through our limitations, not knowing that the God that we're connected to has no limits. He has no limitations. So, what those dreams that we have, we typically water them down because we gauge them based on our ability. But there are so many things that God wants us to do that we can do, but we have to remove the limits and we have to raise our level of expectation because, again, life there's so much more to life beyond what we can see. There's so much more to life beyond what we can see. So, a couple of things, maybe like, I guess I could call this my salty butter review. Um, Nothing really negative, but something that 80s movies have that I think is really, really funny. So, maybe it was the fact that I watched this movie on TV. Like, I never bought like the VHS or anything for this movie. So every time I saw this movie, it was shown on TV. And so of course that TV censors a lot of stuff, right? Um, I did not realize the level of cursing that these kids did in this movie. Again, these are kids. And some of the cuss words in this movie, I was like, oh, I never knew that they did that. Um, for instance, like there is a scene with Mal, and Mikey's mom has hired a housekeeper that only speaks Spanish. Mikey's mom doesn't speak Spanish and asked asked Mal to interpret. Now, first thing, why would you hire a housekeeper that speaks an entirely different language than you do? Why? Makes no sense, right? That was the one part of the movie I thought was weird. But I think the reason why they did that was to show Mouth's charisma and also the crazy mental place or mental space that Mouth was in. Because the interpretation that Mikey or that Mouth was doing was nowhere near what Mikey's mom was actually saying. And I was like, oh my God. Kids that age, you wouldn't think would be talking about sex, heroin, um, drugs and all of that. But man, his interpretation was hilarious, right? Um, so yeah, censorship is a really, really funny thing as you go back and watch some of these movies because you realize that some of these themes, that the original movies had, these, themes, topics that when you watch them on TV, they shielded us from as kids growing up. Secondly, the way that villains try to hurt the main characters was hilarious to me. So there's a scene when they're in the bottom of the restaurant and the female leader of the gang, the mother, she has Trump basically hemmed up, so to speak, and she's wanting information about how he got to the restaurant. And so she threatens to put his hand in a blender. Put his hand in a blender, not chop it off, not break his fingers, but put his hand in a blender. And I was like, yeah, this is a campy's 80s kind of thing where the punishment was always subdued. It was never really super graphic, but it was enough to build a little suspense. And that's how you can see how movies have changed from the 80s until now. Because, again, that's innocent fun. That is several layers below what we are used to now. And again, like it was just so much fun, so much joy going back and watching this particular movie. So that's really all I have for this episode. I love this movie. I love 80s movies. Back to the Future, that entire trilogy, I loved it. Um, Indiana Jones. My favorite Indiana Jones movie is actually Temple of Doom. That movie kind of scared me when I was a kid because they was eating people's brains and stuff. That I mean, it looked like Jello, but they said it was people's brains and had snakes and stuff everywhere. So that was kind of crazy. But yeah, 80s movies are tremendous. It was a great time, and that's really it, guys. So listen, this episode, of course, can be found everywhere you listen to podcasts. If you are an Apple subscriber, please make sure that you leave a 5-star comment, 5-star review for us, and then we will continue with this podcast. Also, please make sure that you follow us on YouTube. We're trying to grow our presence there as well. We are on Instagram at Two Popcorn Preachers Prod, and then of course on Facebook, Salty Butter Crew as well. So next week we are actually going to watch Terminator Dark Fate. Terminator Dark Fate. So I think that movie is on Stars, I think, right now. So, or Amazon, actually. It's on Amazon Prime. So make sure that you watch that for next week's episode. And again, I am Brian, your host. And thank you again so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. You guys have a great day.